Stop calling the Republican Party racist. Now, I obviously acknowledge that going back to as recently as the 90s, we've had recordings of top Republican strategists on prominent campaigns going out and saying things like, you can't just say inward, 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 so you have to instead say welfare queens and urban crime and so forth. They've literally said that they are race baiting and that that's core to their platform. Richard Nixon coined the Southern strategy in the late 1960s, where he would try to race bait and go after the votes in all of these southern Dixiecrat states that had segregation, to try to appeal to them, and through that he won the election. Now, I am not backing away from the point that the Republican Party historically, and even in recent history, was rooted in racism, was deliberately using racism as part of their strategy, appealing to those people. They had fucking David Duke elected at one point, a Klansman, okay? But what I am trying to say is that there is a far more dangerous trend in the Republican Party today, and that is illiberal tendencies, anti-democratic tendencies, overtly anti-democratic tendencies. But that movement, it is not made up of people who are predominantly white. Because in America today, we are such a multi-ethnic nation that it would be impossible to succeed, especially in a state as diverse as, for example, Florida, without the backing of a significant amount of ethnic minorities. And in Florida today, you have legislators filing bills to quote unquote cancel the Democratic Party, outlawing it in the state. You have legislators filing bills to force any blogger or person who writes an article online to register with the state if they criticize the governor, Ron DeSantis. They have to register with the state if they do that. The bill legalizing running over protesters if they're on roads, the bill cracking down on the free speech of teachers and in classrooms alongside book bannings based on incredibly vague language that does not define wokeism or critical race theory or gender ideology. These broad sweeping vague laws exist to suppress speech, and if given a little bit more power and authority to abuse or straight up ignore the Constitution, I think they would go far more insane with this legislation. I mean, like, even just telling people that they need to fucking register with the state if they if they criticize the governor. Like, this is an overtly anti-democratic practice. But some of the most vociferous sections of this movement for DeSantis and many of these other far-right anti-democratic Republicans, some of the most vociferous supporters of these people are minorities. For example, it wasn't too long ago that we were having 15 different rounds of votes for the election of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And who did the far-right Freedom Caucus nominate as their speaker? It was Byron Donalds, a black man, one of the most far-right members of the Republican Congress, a black man, who, by the way, was from Florida. Some of the most vociferous DeSantis supporters, one of the most essential voting blocks that led to his, not just his re-election, but his very, very comfortable re-election at that, are Miami Cubans, Venezuelans, and Latinos more broadly. These aren't people who are just kind of brown. These are people who are pretty damn brown, who are the vanguards of this movement to dishevel democracy in this country and in Florida. And so, why can't we call this what this is? This is fascism. This is not racism. This is not some grand conspiracy to turn all of the black people into second class citizens. This is multicultural, multi ethnic fascism. Or, if you don't like that term, an illiberal authoritarian movement. And the groups that they are going after now are gay people and trans people. They are not going to be the minorities that have been historically targeted because they benefit. For one, they benefit from having all of those minorities in their camp because if they didn't have them, they simply would not have popular support. And additionally, they benefit from having those minorities because they are some of the most violently transphobic and homophobic people in their camp. Those people say the things that are so genocidal that the white Republicans can't get away with it. They can't get away with it because they don't have the minority status, and therefore they can't play the race card. And I don't doubt that there are individual Republican lawmakers who still harbor a great amount of racial prejudice. There were controversies even not too long ago that indicated this. But whether or not they harbor those individual prejudices mean nothing when it comes to perpetuating the system, because the system and their systematic takeover of it, this far right conference, is ultimately going to be contingent on racial harmony. It's going to be contingent on the support of these groups of people. So they have to be tolerant of multiple ethnicities. They have to be tolerant of multiple cultures, or they simply do not succeed in the takeover that they want to see occur. So this is not your 20th century fascism. This isn't even your granddad's Republican Party, because the makeup of the country has significantly changed since then. Just look at all of these images of far-right and Nazi meetups. It's almost all racial minorities who end up being at these rallies or these boys clubs. Not to mention the fact that a lot of these movements are spearheaded by minorities themselves, even when they're mostly comprised of white people. So the notion that the Republican Party and its more radical functionaries that exists throughout these grassroots groups are somehow racist in nature or overtly intolerant of other races is patently absurd. They may uphold certain policies that are rooted in historical racism. For example, not doing anything about environmental racism, the fact that landfills and pollution disproportionately affects black people due to actually racist laws that were enacted long ago, not righting the wrongs of the GI Bill, not applying to blacks, not righting the wrongs of redlining and the historically inequitable nature of schools in African American communities and so forth. These are things that they are not going to address, but just because they are perpetuating existing racist policies with inaction does not mean that their conference itself is overtly racist, or even perhaps implicitly racist. It merely means that they're upholding these historical problems that, by the way, the Democrats also don't do anything about. So I think this is just bad optics. It's bad optics because people can recognize what they see when they see it. That this is a multi-ethnic and multicultural very authoritarian and populistic movement. And so it should be attacked on the grounds that it's authoritarian and populistic, and that we actually have the better alternative, that we have the policy proposals that will improve people's lives in a way that theirs will not. That's going to be how you get people on your side. Dividing people with fear-based tactics surrounding race is merely going to distract from the thing that they should actually be afraid of, which is the disillusion of our democracy and the further corporatization of our country, as well as the segregation of, or overt discrimination of sexual minorities. And so I believe we can build a broad coalition around these economic and freedom-based issues by embracing freedom. But it's not going to be by calling everyone in the party or prominent members of the party racist, because people simply do not believe that when they see what they're seeing. And so ultimately, it's bad optics. Like, you're just not going to get people on board with that. No matter how true it may be behind the scenes, you're not going to get people on board with that. And so, if we're going to have an effective strategy, we need to ditch this rhetoric.